Hello, hello. Bl'Artagnan here with an extremely sped up no synergy boss run number 3. The raw footage for this was like something like 45 minutes, so I decided to just double the speed and hopefully you'll be able to keep up. Luckily, most of the stuff in here isn't the sort of action you need to really drill down into what's happening. So to start off with, we're using kind of the standard Gladio thing for this first wave. Cross beetles are nothing new for us, but Gladio, he really kind of slaps him down in a really satisfying way. Firion actually also really does well on this stage, especially supported by Serah. You'll see his counters hit for meaty damage. I actually struggled for a while to come up with this with a team that could beat this without using synergy. I got through it with synergy on its own, no problem, but when it came time to do something a little more creative, a little bit less by the books, this is a pretty restrictive fight. I think this is the first fight in which, in the Japan version, they had introduced super synergy, so they balanced the fight around that being something you have access to, which wasn't the case with the previous 2 boss rushes. As a result, the fight's heavily skewed toward using synergy characters, and especially like the 3rd and 4th waves, if you're not using synergy, you kind of have to really not struggle, but you really have to plan for it and bring a proper setup to get through it. A lot of people use Squex Airlines to get through the 3rd wave, and I don't blame them. I actually did the same for my synergy run, but that's a different story. Didn't have access to a 3rd synergy character, so I needed something to fill that gap. So, as you can see here, we've been using Hope and Sazh calls to extend Gladio's LD buff. We're going to hold off on using the 2nd Hope, like the LD Hope call, partly to put the debuff on the 2nd wave, and partly because you can't use his regular call and the LD call to extend the same buff twice, and I didn't want to get confused and accidentally try to extend it when the old one was up. Serah is just fantastic here. I ended up going back in for her after throwing a bunch of tickets at her LD and getting the BT but not the LD, and thinking, okay, I can get by without her, and I probably could, but I ended up going back in anyway and throwing probably more tickets than maybe, I think probably the most tickets I've thrown at someone, because I figure she's probably going to be the most versatile unit we're going to see for a while, just looking ahead, in terms of her auras, in terms of the fact that content isn't balanced around her. As we've seen with Vincent, that can be a really potent thing. And also, I think she's considered a pretty likely burst candidate, so maybe that's a bonus. So, we're getting pretty close to clearing out the 1st wave, which is great, because basically this is probably the most turn efficient of the 3 teams I bring, and so the longer they stay in, the better it'll be for me, because the more damage they do on the off turns. In boss rush, it's all about off turn damage, since they don't count enemy turns for that 50 turn limit. In hindsight, if I had let B go, I probably could have... I might have killed A on the launch there, but... luckily it ends up not really making too big a difference in the end. I will say I tried a bunch of different teams, as I mentioned, and Firion ended up, I think, being the difference maker. You'll see I end up finishing with a few turns to spare after cutting it very, very close in previous runs. I think the closest I got before bringing in Firion was a single kind of lucky fluke run where I got the last wave down to 1% before running out of turns. When you properly support Firion with with another support who really amps his damage and battery, his off-turn damage is premium stuff. Shoutouts to Inkwilder and Black Cloud. You'll see here I haven't used Hope's LD call to extend Gladio's buff because I want to wait until they're under 80% and have cleansed, since they're gonna get the brave damage reduction and stuff. I figure that's probably the time to bring in Hope's debuff. Kinda getting a little nervous here because I want to make sure I don't run out of Gladio buff in time, before that happens. Luckily, as we see here, we have plenty of time to extend that buff. Now the goal of this team at this stage is I want to try to get them under 50% before the next team comes in. The reason for that is when the team comes back, the boss doesn't retain the big brave charge they do or the tail up status between teams. So if I can kind of incite that in them and then switch to the next team, then I don't have to worry about it for a little while. It just kind of takes a load off the mind, you know. I got a bit lazy with the sound design here. Decided not to edit any music, mostly because this was long and took a while, and I was kind of frustrated with it. And I thought it sounded kind of funny sped up. Let me know which you prefer, because if you prefer the music, obviously that we can do the music. If you really like super sped up DFO audio, alright, I mean that's your thing. I'm happy to cater that. Another nice thing about Firion here that I actually forgot about is that his skill 2 helps manage the orb. The orb is to heal for 50% or more of your health. And Firion's S2 heals himself, well, it heals everyone for 45% of their health, and if Firion has the summon board passives that boost it by 5%, he'll heal himself for 50%, which helps with the orb. That's a handy bit of utility that I actually forgot about this fight. And just saw it right there. You see the orb went up. I had forgotten until that moment. Probably could have let them go for another turn had I remembered that. But this works. You will see we end up not being able to shave down all of this brave they charge up in time. But we do a decent chunk of damage during the summon at least. Now, I'm kind of nervous about how much brave they've accumulated with the tail up, so I decided to just use his C65 to switch out to the next team. We have Aerith, Paladin, Celes, and Lightning. I find at the end of the day, sometimes you just, Lightning's still kind of the best there is as far as single target. You don't get to play with us damage. The one nervous thing is, she keeps jumping in front of people before, and I need my healers to go to manage the orb. Luckily, Celes manages to sneak in there and do his thing. I'm trying to focus A now mostly because A has Aerith's debuff on him, getting that bonus hit point damage, and it's going to be a little while since Aerith's going to be able to get to go again and apply it to the other guy. So I'm not thrilled with this, but I think I've talked about this before, having to break them out of order just because I want to get that debuff on them. Looking at the orb, trying to decide what to do. I probably will be able to survive until Celes goes. feel like Cecil, during his LD, he speaks quickly enough as it is, so doubling the speed really kind of makes me chuckle. So see here, we're mostly just kind of playing keep away. We can let them take turns, really, since it isn't going to count against the turn count. But since we don't have off-turn damage, it really doesn't do anything beyond just reducing our stress, so I let it go there. No skin off our nose, really. I'm still alive. We're going to focus B for a bit, because I forget whether they enraged. It turns out they don't, but I couldn't remember. So there we go. That's one down. Now, I'd gotten pretty close on the last wave with the team I brought to this fight, but wasn't able to seal the deal with other teams. So my goal here with this team in this fight is to try to get them as close to dead as possible. I want to buy as much time for that last team as I can. And if there's one setup that we know is great at killing dudes, well, besides Quex Airlines, it's dropping a whole bunch of frame debuffs on a dude and then letting lightning kind of go ham with her burst. So we're not quite ready to go yet. We gotta drop the Jack debuff, breaking them out of order, which I'm not thrilled with again, but we'll take it. And then we'll drop a Seal Evil. It's unlikely Aerith's going to get a chance to work through all of her Seal Evil buffs, so we can just go ahead. We've got the Camelot Call. Now time for an extremely hyper burst. I'm making a mental note to myself that A is further back, so they're the one I want to hit with the EX if possible. That's a lot of damage. So we have 10 turns to go, and they're about halfway there, a little over halfway. So we're going to try to do as much as we can within those last 8 turns now. We have the summon as well, and we're going to try to make the most of that. But the team that we're bringing for the third wave can get really bogged down against these guys because they rely heavily on Celes' Ice Enchant, and so they don't really have the damage to do a whole lot to these guys. So it's really important that we deal as much as we can so that they don't have to spend much time here. Shockingly, you know, the theme of a boss rush being to kill the bosses quickly, who would have seen that coming? But we're basically going to use Lightning's LD to have her monopolize the rest of the time for the most part. Aside from this quick LD usage. Now eyeballing their health, thinking, how much damage does she do on her per turn? Because I haven't really been paying attention. It looks like she's taking about 3% per turn. And this is going to do about triple that. So we're at 1% there. We're almost done. Okay, 1% each. That went way better than I could have hoped, honestly. I figured they'd show up in the 5 to 10% range. For them to be this low is just splendid. And to wit, we managed to take them both out with a Squall LD. I did that partially to raise his stacks and partially because I needed something that hit as hard as possible. So now we're on to the snakes. These guys are jerks. I actually, again, another thing I had to figure out through trial and error is the importance of off-turn damage here. With Celes' trap, I had been kind of pushing them back, and I realized since I was losing out on player turns, the thing to do is to let them take more turns and get hit. Because as long as they don't kill us, we don't care if they take turns. The other thing is that I'm trying mentally to keep track of how many actions I'm taking, because after about 15 or so player actions, they're going to go into that spined mode, which is basically the worst thing ever. They get a bunch of stacks, they get overhead buffs, which doesn't seem right. That's our thing, you know, overhead buffs. I don't like that they get overhead buffs. But I'm trying to keep track, and you'll actually see I miscount by 1, which is kind of annoying. My plan had been to try to drop the Setzer call right before it was time. Unfortunately, I end up being off by a single turn in terms of my counting. Not to spoil things, but it works out alright. So here, again, that off-turn damage, I'm not too worried about them. I should have dropped the Setzer call here, but I thought to myself, okay, I'm pretty sure based on my counting I have until Balthier goes again to drop it. And I really want them to lose that Jack call first, because I don't want them with 4 debuffs. 4 debuffs means they're doing Shed Plus, they're getting a bunch of stats, and I'm probably having to reset. I was playing a bit of a risky move, risky game bringing in the Jack call in the first place. But I wanted that extra oomph, and I figured it'd be short enough that I could get away with it. As you can see here, it kind of ends up a little awkward for me. But it does have a side benefit, because the thing about Jack Call is that Jack Call's really potently amps up your damage. And that means that, the massive reduction these guys normally get is significantly reduced. And you're able to actually hit through it. If Jack Call wasn't here, I can guarantee you Balthier and Celes would be hitting for 1s, and it just wouldn't be doing anything. So I kind of lucked out in a sense. Again, if I had Setzer called properly, this wouldn't have been an issue, but it kind of goes to show you don't necessarily need flawless execution to pull things off sometimes. I'm trying not to push him below 50 if we can avoid it, but at the end of the day, if it happens, it happens. Using the LD there to guarantee the shave and get rid of their spines. Now, I do want them to take one last turn before we drop that Setzer call on them, because we don't want them, ruining us because they get the 4 debuffs on them. It's a pretty interesting mechanic, because lately we've been doing a lot of 6 debuff shenanigans, and so for them to say you need at least 2 debuffs, but you can't have more than 3, it's like it makes you think a bit, which I appreciate. I definitely had to do a few resets after realizing I had miscounted how many debuffs I was bringing on a team. I'd partly brought the Cloud Call to kind of buy time against these guys, and partly I had expected to need a few turns with this team in the previous wave, and I was going to use the Cloud Call combined with Celes Battery to try to get kind of get some cheeky damage in there. It ends up being unnecessary. Here we go. We're actually doing really well compared to how I was worried we'd do. Go ahead and... Celes is great here, but she doesn't have a whole lot of AoE shaving, and that's kind of what I want, just to make sure both of these guys drop their spines at the same time. So that's what I did there. And for the same reason I'm using her LD here, even though it's not the most damage, just to get rid of that spine stuff. They're pretty low. I think we're about time to, yeah. At this point I've used Cloud's Burst and Lightning's Burst to clear levels that, to clear with teams I wouldn't have been able to clear with. Not this, but just in general. This is the first time I've used Squall to really kind of achieve something in the game that I wouldn't have been able to achieve without it, and I appreciate that. The Start Dash banner, I hope a lot of new players are benefiting from it, because it gave us some good units through that thing. We're getting pretty darn close. That's a nice amount of damage. At this point, I don't want to have to count it whether they're going to go into the spine thing again, so I just go straight into the summon. I want to hit them with that maximum LD charge from Balthier, get that maximum damage from her, and I want to hit as much of a ceiling with Squall as I can, because you see there with Diablos, I used Diablos to take advantage of since I knew their health was going to be dropping from the spines, to take advantage of the Ice Enchant, but it also has a side benefit here of giving us a much higher damage ceiling. Well, not when they have the spines up, but you can see here. Just about there, checking the HP requirement. We're good. Just need to finish things off. Not with Balthier, because they're a little bit too tanky for that. But I think, fittingly, we're going to close things out with Squally X. 10 turns to go. This ended up being pretty stressful for me, but I'm glad I was able to pull it off. Oh boy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the run. Maybe like the video if you want to share it with others. Consider subscribing, and I'll see you around for the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.